I'm Sanjeev Sanyal. I'm an economist and a writer, and today I'm going to talk about Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma as a liberal framework and how the two feed upon each other. Since this lecture is about Hinduism as a liberal framework, let me start by acknowledging that both liberalism and Hinduism are terms that mean many things to many people. They are fuzzy terms, and perhaps the best place to start is by explaining both of them. Now, let's take liberalism. Now, the term liberal has ended up being, in these days, being seen as being the left end of a right-to-left ideological spectrum. However, this has not always been the case, and depends a lot upon the time and the context. So, for example, in Australia, the Liberal Party is the right-wing party. In Canada, the Liberal Party is the left-wing party. Similarly, the word conservative, which is very often used as the opposite of liberal, in, say, the UK, the conservative would be a right-wing person who probably believes in more conservative social structures, but on the other hand, they are also more likely to be believers in liberal economic policies. On the other hand, in China, a conservative would be probably a die-hard Maoist. So as you can see, these things mean many things depending on the context. Similarly, the same person can, depending on context, use the word liberal in a totally different way or have contradictory ideas. So a person who may be socially very liberal may be against economic liberalization. So, for example, you had John Stuart Mill, who is the founder, one of the founders of classical liberalism. But on the other hand, he used to work for the East India Company and made many disingenuous arguments for justifying British colonial rule in many parts of the world, including in India. So, if one could argue that in that space he was an illiberal. You have a similar thing today as well. So, you have people who would call themselves liberal, probably feminists, but then would go on to justify triple talaq, say in the Indian context, or make arguments for, say, hijab in a Western context. So clearly, liberalism as a term is a catch-all for many different things. So for the purposes of this lecture, I'm going to define liberalism in the following way. First of all, liberalism must include in it the idea of pluralism, i.e. that the world can have different ways of looking. Some of these ways of looking may be contradictory, but liberalism allows for a broad umbrella of these ideas. The second constituent of liberalism, at least for the purposes of this lecture, must be that there is a general acceptance for openness and a preference for openness and liberty. So, when in doubt, you will opt for a liberty and openness as being your default option. The third element of liberalism would be a sense of skepticism and openness to evolution of ideas, i.e. not being entirely certain about what the truth is. And this comes through in many places in liberal writings. One of the best known liberals of modern times, of course, is Friedrich Hayek, the economist and Nobel laureate. And there are some great ideas that you can pick up from Hayek. One of his best books is this one, The Road to Serfdom, which is, of course, perhaps his most famous book. But if you want a short introduction to his ideas, perhaps you should read his Nobel acceptance speech, which is called The Pretense of Knowledge. As you can see, the very term, the heading itself tells you that he was ultimately in favor of allowing for different ways of thinking about the world, and particularly allowing for skepticism. So I think these are the three elements that must be part of any true liberal view of the world. Now we come to Hinduism, or Sanatan Dharma, if you prefer that term. Here again, Hinduism is a fuzzier concept than many other, say, Abrahamic religions may be. And it contains within it many beliefs and faiths, etc. But Hinduism as a whole is not a belief or faith. So this leads to a lot of confusion, and you'll have, for example, many people will come and say Hinduism is not a religion, but it's a way of life. I'm afraid using the term way of life leaves me no wiser than before. So I would much rather say that Hinduism is in fact a religion, except it is very different from an Abrahamic religion. Why would I say so? Because Hinduism does contain within itself many of the elements of a religion. For example, it thinks about a person and his place in the universe. It thinks about ethics. It has within it rituals and traditions and festivals. All of these things are parts of every religion, and Hinduism too has it. What Hinduism, however, does is somewhat differently from other religions is that it is not synonymous with a particular faith or belief. So when you go to an Abrahamic religion, for example, it is synonymous with having a particular faith or belief. So if you are a Christian, then you must believe that there is one God and that Jesus Christ is his son and that he sacrificed himself for the benefit of humanity on a cross. Now, if you don't believe this set of axioms, then you cannot be a Christian. Similarly, in Islam, you must believe that there is one God and that Muhammad is his chosen and last prophet. Now, if you do not believe this, it's difficult to call yourself a Muslim. Now, there is no starting axiom in Hinduism. So this is the reason it is fundamentally different. In Hinduism, you can be a polytheist, you can be a monotheist, you can be a monoist, you can be an atheist even, because there are actually many well-known traditions within Hinduism of atheism and well-established ones. And you can have any combination thereof or a completely new belief if you so wish. So in that sense, while Hinduism has many specific beliefs within it, Hinduism as a whole is not a specific belief. So what brings unity to Hinduism? The unity of Hinduism is brought together by not the answers it gives, by the questions it asks, by the processes of inquiry and searching that it puts together, by the idioms that many of its texts bring together in order to allow for a framework of conversation. Hinduism comes together because of various festivals that are shared, various rituals that are shared. So in that sense, Hinduism is indeed a religion. But like liberalism, it allows for many of the elements of plurality. It allows for skepticism. It allows for preference for liberty and openness. Now, in order to understand Hinduism as a liberal system, you need to understand how the architecture of Hinduism is set up. Now, all the texts of Hinduism, and there are many, and by the way, you can keep adding to them, by the way, there's no end to the number of new texts that you can create. However, all the texts are divided into two groups, Shruti and Smriti. Shruti means that which is divinely inspired or heard, and Smriti means that which is remembered, i.e. the great thoughts. Now, the Shruti texts are the only truly canonical texts of Hinduism, and it includes, strictly speaking, only the first three Vedas, the Rig, the Sam and the Yajur, not even strictly speaking the Atharva Veda. And the Smriti, on the other hand, includes every other text that there is. Now, what is interesting about the Smriti texts is, and this by the way includes even the Bhagavad Gita, which is so sacred to Hinduism. Even the Bhagavad Gita is a Smriti text and consequently not a canonical text. It is possible to be a Hindu and not believe in the ideas of the Bhagavad Gita but in some other texts. And in fact, there are sects that would not take Bhagavad Gita as being, for example, the Shakta tradition would consider the Bhagavad Gita as holy, but would not consider it as a central text. And there are others as well who would do so. That doesn't matter to Hinduism because this is a Smriti text. And this is true for all the texts, like the Manusmriti. Many people get very worked about the Manusmriti and the ideas within it. Well, my point is, if you don't like it, please write another one. It is not a canonical text at all. So what is written then in the Shruti texts? The Shruti texts then are basically the underlying operating system of Hinduism. So since many of you will own a smartphone, the best way to think about it is to think about it in the following way. The Shruti texts are the operating system of Hinduism, and the Smriti texts are the apps. You can add an app. Some apps are more used than others. If you don't like a particular app, you can delete it. You can write your own app, and so on. So this is how Hinduism is set up, which allows for a huge amount of plurality of ideas while maintaining some sort of a internal coherence. Now what I'm going to do is to give you a sense of the kinds of interesting things that the Shruti texts then do in order to provide this operating system. And here I'm going to start with what is called the Nasadiya Sukta, or the creation hymn. This is one of the most important starting foundational chants or hymns of Hinduism. So I'm going to read out a translation. I'm not going to do the whole one for time reasons, but just to give you a flavor of what this Nasadiya Suktam or creation hymn says. And it talks about what was there in the very beginning of creation. So this is what it says. The very first part of the hymn goes as follows. Then there was nothing, neither air nor the heaven above. What covered it? Where was it? In whose keeping? Was there then the cosmic ocean, deep and unfathomable? Then there was neither death nor immortality, neither night nor day. So this is the description it has of what was there in the very beginning. Basically utter nothingness. In fact, so nothing that even the term nothing itself did not exist. And then it goes on like this and keeps talking about, the negation, i.e. this in the beginning there was literally nothing. And then after iterating this point several times, and then comes to the last part of the Suktam, where it then says this: who knows and who can say from where it all came, how the universe came into being? Do the gods know? But they too came afterwards. Who then knows? He, the origin of creation, who perhaps created the world, the great creator who controls the world, surely he knows, or perhaps he too knows not. Now this is an incredible piece of intellectual this is an incredible piece of intellectual framework, and notice how fundamentally it is different from most other religions or ideologies. Quite apart from, of course, I just mentioned about the Abrahamic religions, but let's take even Marx, for example. Marxism's basic thesis is that there is one way to think about the world, which is based on a certain dialectic materialism, which dominates the way history flows. Notice Nasadiya Suktam would laugh at such a unidimensional view of the world. Now, what happens then is that this then sets in motion lines of thought which mean that you can add various ways of thinking. And again, it's important here to understand a little bit about the history of how the Vedas, particularly the Rigveda, came to be compiled and composed. So the Rigveda is written in a very ancient form of Sanskrit, Vedic Sanskrit. In fact, it is so ancient that you can be a complete expert in classical Sanskrit and have great difficulty in understanding the Vedic texts. Anyway, this is a Bronze Age text, and it came to be compiled under the rule of a tribe called the Bharatas or the Tritsus. They were a small tribe who occupied what is broadly now the modern state of Haryana. And we are told that this tribe, led by a king called Sudasa and his guru, Vasishtha, went and defeated a coalition of 10 tribes which were attacking them from the west. through Punjab, from western Punjab, and that there was a great battle on the banks of the Ravi on which the Bharatas defeated the 10 tribes. Then Sudas turned around and defeated a bunch of tribes near the Yamuna, some of them probably led by a chieftain called Bheda. Now, having done that, what happened is that the Bharatas effectively created the first known empire of India. But then they did something very, very unique. You see, when a tribe defeated other tribes, and it's the common thing to do would be that you would claim that your gods were more superior to the others' gods, and they would impose your ideas on the others. The Bharatas, however, did something very, very different. Instead of imposing their gods, they instead called in all the defeated tribes that they had, and perhaps even those that they hadn't defeated and had been in contact with, and essentially asked all of their sages and rishis and thinkers to come together. And they compiled the Rigveda as a compilation of all the ideas of all these people. So basically what they did, they compiled the best ideas of their time. This is somewhere in the Bronze Age. Now, it is important here to notice that therefore, by doing so, they brought together a lot of the knowledge that already existed. So this is important. The Rigveda is not the beginning of a certain civilization. It is the culmination of an already existing civilization. And this point, although it is very explicit in the Rigveda itself, is oddly not brought out by many people. So I am going to now read the very first shlok of the Rigveda. I have got here a standard version of the Rigveda translation. It's called the Hymns of the Rigveda by Ralph Griffith. There are many other translations. I have used this deliberately here in case you were thinking that I was making some very special translations. I have used a 19th century British translation so that nobody accuses me of making some outrageous interpretations. Now, the very first shloka of the Rigveda is a hymn to Agni. And it is a hymn many people read without really understanding its purport. Why is this, of all the other hymns, the very first hymn? Because it starts by saying something quite interesting. We laud Agni, our chosen priest for the sacrifice, he who lavishes prosperity, Agni the worthy one, who is praised by both the ancient and the modern sages. Now remember, they are essentially starting by mentioning clearly that this compilation remembers not just the modern sages of that time, i.e. of that Bronze Age, but also the ancient sages. Even at that time, they are starting by saying that we remember that these ideas came from some even more ancient period. So this is a very important point because they are effectively not wiping the slate clean, but bringing together ideas that they themselves claim are already in existence. Now this point about bringing together different ideas of pluralism is again repeated in the very last suktam of the Rigveda. And I'm going to read it here again. This is again, starts with to Agni, but then it makes a very interesting point. Thou, mighty Agni, gatherest up all that is precious for thy friend. Bring us all treasures as thou art enkindled in libation's place. Assemble, speak together, let your minds all be of one accord. As the ancient gods all sat down in their appointed share around the sacrificial fire, the place is common, common is the assembly, common the mind, so be their thoughts united. A common purpose do I lay before you and worship you with your general oblation. One and the same be your resolve, and be your mind of one accord. United be the thoughts of all, that all may be happily agree. Again, you can see that this document is explicitly saying this, repeated in the very last suktam of the Rigveda, that this is about bringing together various ideas, that all the ancient gods have a place around the sacrificial fire. It's not just the gods of the Bharatas. And this is again comes across throughout the book very, very clearly. Vishwamitra is a very important rishi, and many of his compositions, including the Gayatri Mantra, are important part of the Rigveda. But remember, Vishwamitra was not the rishi of the winning side. He was the rishi of the 10 tribes that were defeated. And yet his ideas are here. So this is a model, a framework of accretion, of absorption, not of imposition. And then Hinduism then grows therefore through accretion. As it expands, it then takes on new ideas that were already in existence. So many often those who do not know much about this particular history of the Rigveda, they will say that Indra and Agni etc. were ancient Vedic gods that were worshipped then, and that Vishnu and Shiva etc. are later gods. Totally wrong view of the world. There's more than adequate evidence that all these other gods, whether it's Durga and the Devi tradition, which is also mentioned by the way in the Rigveda, and the Shaivite thoughts etc., or even gods that are not mentioned in the Rigveda. These gods did exist in various parts of the country, and through this operating system, they came to inhabit this rather broad system that we now know as Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma. Now, what I'm going to then say is that, okay, so we have here Hinduism, a very liberal framework, and it allows for all kinds of new ideas, it allows for evolution, but does that mean that consequently it allows you to bring anything and everything into it? And this is an important point, because you see, that which is open to everything is then consequently nothing, because it then doesn't mean anything specific at all. And this is, by the way, a well-known problem. It's called the paradox of liberalism or the paradox of tolerance. And Karl Popper, who is, in my view at least, one of the best liberal thinkers of the 20th century, brings up this issue of the paradox of tolerance. And those of you interested should definitely read this book by Karl Popper. It's called The Open Society and Its Enemies. It comes in 2 volumes, and I would strongly urge you to have a look at this. So I'm going to now read some of what he means by the business of the paradox of tolerance. So he says, Karl Popper says, less well known is the paradox of tolerance. Unlimited tolerance must lead to the disappearance of tolerance. If we extend unlimited tolerance even to those who are intolerant, if we are not prepared to defend a tolerant society against the onslaught of the intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. Then he goes on later to say, we should therefore claim, in the name of tolerance, the right not to tolerate the intolerant. So this is important, because basically what he's saying is that liberalism, tolerance, pluralism, etc. cannot be so tolerant that it incorporates and allows the expansion of ideas that will destroy tolerance itself. So this is a very important thing, because then comes the question about Hinduism. Since Hinduism allows for many thoughts, is blasphemy possible in Hinduism? And I would argue there is only one true blasphemy that is allowed in Hinduism, and that is this, that we cannot allow for, or Hinduism cannot allow for, ideas that are completely monolithic and do not allow for other views of things. This is an important part of what Hinduism must protect, because if it does not protect the idea of pluralism or different ways of thinking, then it cannot protect itself against monolithic ideologies. And this is something, by the way, that is reiterated very strongly in later ideas of Hinduism as well. So, for example, you have here the story of Sati and Daksha. As you know, Sati was married to Lord Shiva, and her father, Daksha, decided to have a great yajna, or fire sacrifice. And he invited all the gods, and he invited all the sages, and this great fire sacrifice was held in which the only person who was not invited to it was Shiva himself. This was because Daksha held that his dear daughter had married somebody that he didn't quite approve of. So, as a result, he didn't call Lord Shiva. Now, notice that in not calling Lord Shiva to this great fire, he was violating the Samana Suktam, or the last Suktam of the Rigveda, which says all the gods have a place around the sacrificial fire. And of course, when Sati, uninvited, turned up at the venue, she saw that all the gods had been invited except her husband Shiva. So she was so deeply affected by this that she sacrificed herself into the sacrificial fire. And when Shiva heard of this, he picked up her body and began the dance of destruction. And the gods all became panicked that this would destroy the world. And so Vishnu sliced up Sati's body and scattered the pieces of her body all over the Indian subcontinent. Now notice what has happened as a result of this. Essentially, the point being made here is the following: that not allowing Shiva violated the Shruti text, the Rigveda itself, by not giving him his appointed place around the fire. Sati sacrificed herself in order to defend this point. And then, through the cutting up and scattering of her body, she then, across the subcontinent, the scattering of this body then again unites all of India. So if you look at a map of India, you will see that there are Shakti Pithas all across India where pieces of her body had fell, and they are all over. So the westernmost point of this is Balochistan, the Hinglaj Devi temple, and the easternmost is in Tripura in the northeast, but there are several others in the northeast as well. And then there is the one in Kashmir, but then the southernmost one is in Kanyakumari, and there's one in Jaffna as well. So you can see that in shattering herself, she then also ended up uniting a certain sacred geography. Many of the ideas that are discussed in this lecture, particularly one about how to think about the architecture of Hinduism, are there in my book. It's called India and the Age of Ideas. You can see the first section of this book. It does talk explicitly about how Hinduism functions as a complex adaptive system, and you will see that it's directly related to the idea of a liberal, plural, organic, evolving system. So please do pick up a copy and have a look at it. And then finally, there is an interesting book which I think would be quite interesting to those who care about this idea of whether or not tolerant systems should tolerate intolerance. I mentioned earlier, of course, reading Karl Popper, but those who prefer a historical narrative of what can happen may want to pick up this book by Catherine Nixie. It's called The Darkening Age. It's a history about the late Roman Empire, which was actually a surprisingly liberal place, and how a zealous group of early Christians captured this society and pushed it into what is now known as the Dark Ages. So again, a warning about the need to protect liberal systems from illiberal, monolithic ideas. I'm going to stop here. But let me read out again a few reading lists that you may find interesting for the purposes of understanding what I'm saying. There is The Open Society and Its Enemies by Karl Popper, The Road to Serfdom by Friedrich Hayek, as well as his Nobel Prize lecture on the Pretense of Knowledge, The Darkening Age by Catherine Nixie, India and the Age of Ideas by Sanjeev Sanyal, and the Hymns of the Rigveda, for which there are several translations. Thank you very much.